Hi, I'm Frank. When Beth asked me to do this, I don't think I knew what the theme was, and then I figured out what the theme was. It's bad jobs that you've had, and I've never had a job. And I've spent my entire life trying to figure out a way to not have a job, and that led to being for over 20 years in this marginal punk rock band, and then a couple of years after that, I accidentally became a novelist. So I was a pretend rock star and a pretend writer, and those aren't really jobs. So Beth said, "Well, just tell a rock and roll story," and so I do have a few rock and roll stories. A lot of those stories are very similar. There's the you forget where you parked the van story, or their underage girl sneaks into your van and stows away across state lines and hijinks ensues story, or there's the you crash your van into something story, or various van-related stories. But and you've probably heard them before. The one that I thought of telling is the one that I think is a little bit more unusual than the usual van one, which is band spends night in a Polish work prison camp. So I'm working up to telling that one, but because of the literariness of this situation, which is a little bit unusual for me, I'm going to preface it with this whole other story about my other pretend job, the novelist job, because I just can't resist because I'm standing here. This happened about a few months before my book came out, and I was spending Christmas in rural England, Norfolk, England, and I was at a country pub, and a lady there was from the British publishing industry. And I think she worked at Penguin, something like that. So, what you do when you're in this situation is you'll say, "Oh, I'm a writer." And when publishing industry people, I guess they hear that all the time, like everyone's trying to say they're a writer. And no, really, I have a contract. And then they really roll their eyes. You have this conversation with these publishing people. It's no different in England than it is here. They give you a little quiz usually to make sure, well, really just to put you on the spot. And they say, well, and what this lady said was, well, who are you reading? And that's the kind of question that I don't know. I can't answer. I mean, I wrote one book, but I've read several. But when I'm on the spot like that, I freeze up, kind of like I'm afraid I'm going to do now. So I kind of took a drink and looked at my shoes, which is a good thing to do in England because everyone's always looking at their shoes, avoiding eye contact. Well, she said, "Well, what do you think of? What's your opinion of Die Vegas?" And I said, "That sounds possibly German." It's what I was thinking. Maybe it has to do with birds. It's to do with gambling. I didn't know. I had a choice there of whether I was going to pretend that I was very familiar with this Die Vegas or not, and so I was going to say, "Oh, right, of course." I just didn't mention it because it's so obvious. Yes, that's my absolute favoriteest book. But instead, I just said, "Sounds possibly German. Is it any good?" And she sort of disappeared imperiously at that point, and I had felt like felt exactly like the kind of person who had never read Die Vegas and never would read Die Vegas. And basically, my ignorance of Die Vegas had ruined Christmas. And it was about an hour later that I was at the bar, because I'm a little slow, and I guess the barmaid had served me my drink, and I said, "Dave Eggers," and the lady was really surprised. Usually I get the accents a little bit better, but anyway, so on to this other story. This also happened in Europe. My band did a